Before starting today's webinar on National Education Policy NEP 2020, having a theme, what NEP does for us and what we can do for it. So before proceeding, I request August gathering to observe silence of 1 minute to pay homage to our late Honorable President of India, Bharat Ratna, Pranab Mukherjee ji. So may I request all the members to observe silence of 1 minute, please? Thank you. Thank you, one and all. So we are moving forward. At the outset, I welcome all the invitees, in particular our chief guest, Professor A.K. Suresh from IIT Bombay, and our invited guests, BOG members, Senate members, and director, deputy director, and members of the faculty, administrative officers, staff, and our beloved alumni and students. With this, we will start our webinar program. So we have a slated program with inaugural ceremony. So we will start with inaugural ceremony with an agenda starting with invocation, introduction to webinar by Professor Ananta Narayana, Deputy Director NITK. Then welcome address by Professor KUM Rao, Director NITK. Then introduction of the speaker by Professor MS Bhatt, Dean FW NITK. And following that, we will have webinar from our distinguished speaker, Professor A.K. Suresh. Following that, there will be interactive session with webinar participants and speaker. Presidential address will be delivered by Professor K. Balaveer Reddy, Chairman, BOG NITK. Following that, I will be delivering the vote of thanks. So this is the slated program as per the agenda. Now we are moving forward with a invocation. Thank you, Ms. Pratiksha and Mr. Bhargav. Now, we will be having introduction to the webinar delivered by Professor Anantanarayana, Deputy Director of NITK Surathkal. Over to Anantanarayana VS. Anantanarayan.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. So thanks, Professor Vittal. I quote, "The whole purpose of the education is to turn mirrors into windows. When you gaze into a mirror, the only things you see are your reflection and a limited area around you. However, when you look out a window, the view you can be almost endless. This is the power of education system." Respected BOG Chairperson, Professor K. Balavira Reddy, members of BOG, Director, Professor K. Uma Maheshwar Rao, distinguished speaker of today's webinar, and also our board member, Professor A.K. Suresh of IIT Bombay, Senate members, deans, HODs, faculty members, administrative officers, staff, alumni, and students of NITK, good morning to you all. Welcome you all for the second webinar in the webinar series of National Education Policy 2020. NEP 2020 envisions a complete overhaul and re-energizing the higher education system to deliver high quality higher education with equity and inclusion. Emphasize on multidisciplinary and skill-based education, experiential learning with a research component, synchronous and asynchronous mode of course delivery, academic bank of credits, that is ABC in a curriculum, multiple entry and exit provisions in the curriculum, disruptive technology inclusion, higher GER, gross enrollment ratio, tenure track and fast track faculty positions are some of the important salient points of NEP 2020. The whole idea of the NEP 2020 webinar series at NITK is to make ourselves equipped with the academics requirements and gear ourselves to become tier 1 institute, that is research intensive institute. Once we get the insight of the NEP 2020 requirements, there should be brainstorming sessions within each department and across the departments to look at all facets of the future curriculum, and we have to be ourselves ready with the vision, mission, and plan of action for NEP 2020. We may have to start working on a hybrid model, having a top-down approach for generic aspects from institute to departments, and a bottom-up approach for final implementation aspects starting from the department itself. On 25th August 2020, we had first webinar and is on roles of Institute of National Importance. The distinguished speaker and our Senate member, Professor Shiv Prakash of IISc Bangalore, discussed the salient features of NEP 2020 and possible roadmap for implementation at NITK. Today, we have another distinguished speaker and NITK board member, Professor A.K. Suresh of IIT Bombay, who will be presenting on NEP 2020, what it does for us and what we can do for it. In this talk, he will focus mainly on the realization of NEP 2020, which mainly depends on how the institutions take it up and respond to it and what it enables institutions to do. With these few words, I once again welcome you all for this second webinar on NEP 2020. Thank you. Over to Professor Vittal.
Thank you, Professor Anantanarayana VS. We are moving forward. We have welcome address by our beloved director, Professor K.U.M. Rao, Director NITK Surathkal. Over to you, sir.
Esteemed chief guest, a distinguished speaker of the second in the series of webinar on National Education Policy 2020, Professor A.K. Suresh of IIT Mumbai and our BOG member. Honorable Chairperson, Board of Governors, K. Balavira Reddy, Professor Shiv Prakash, Professor IISc Bangalore and our Senate member, other BOG members, Professor J. Kumar, NIT Warangal, our Senate member, Professor Anantanarayana, Deputy Director, Professor M.S. Butt, Dean Faculty Welfare, Professor K.P. Vittal, Dean Alumni and then International Affairs, Dean Acad, Dean Student Welfare, Dean R&C, Dean P&D, faculty and staff members, students of NITK, and esteemed guests of the day. A very good morning to you all. It gives me immense pleasure to be present here before you for the second in the series of webinars on the Education Policy 2020. The theme of the second in the series, the webinar, is what NEP does for us and what we can do for it. In the last webinar, we concluded on the point that the policy aims at making India a global knowledge superpower. Before we start the takeaways of NEP 2020, here is the stat which highlights the following. I'm further extending the Professor Shiv Prakash's presentation on gross enrollment ratio. It is just about 26.3% compared to 58.2% in senior secondary and 79% in secondary, meaning most of the students don't even enroll in higher education. Of the 30 million students enrolled in UG studies, only 20% graduate every year. The other statistics which really reveal is that there is a lack of majority of the Indian universities in global ranking, that is a QS ranking. The academic curriculum is not in line with the demands of the job market. This is another highlighted point in the statistics, which is really revealing that. Other one is that the higher education system is unable to keep pace with the potential demographic dividend, thereby producing a large number of unemployable young graduates in India. These are a few highlights of what we really inadequate things that are present in our education system. Now let us look at the major takeaways of NEP 2020. As already been discussed in the first lecture on the NEP, and then what Professor Anantanarayana also highlighted, the recommendations in the new policy are about the changes in the curriculum and pedagogy. Curriculum is all about the mode in which we are trying to give the harness the students, and it is going to be flexible without any watertight compartments. Students can select subjects according to their choice. Now coming to the pedagogy, the way in which it is to be taught, okay, it gives importance to the development of skills. Until now, or rather at present, the focus is on mastering the content, as students are expected to score high marks. I think you're all aware that higher CGPA is the one who gets the higher opportunities. And NEP highlights that schools are places of mastering the skills and other competencies, while universities are the places where they apply the skills to the real-time problems. Other takeaway of the NEP 2020 is that one regulator to all. The policy aims to reduce the number of educational regulators to one. That means the UGC and AICT comes under one umbrella. Again, highlighting a highlight of NEP 2020 is the gross enrollment ratio. It has to be increased to 50% by 2035. Let me remind all the viewers and then the delegates here that even amongst the BRIC countries, India is the least with the GER at 26.3%. And then that is the greatest challenge for the NEP 2020 to really increase it to 50% by at least by 2035. Other takeaway of NEP is that multidisciplinary education and research universities, that is MERU, they will be setting up with a scope of multiple entry and exit provisions, which with appropriate degree certification after every exit conditions. And also provisions of academic bank of credit, ABC, that help the academic credit transfer from one institution to the other institution. And then the last takeaway of the NEP, the salient takeaways of the NEP, the last of it is that high performing Indian universities will be encouraged to set up campuses on other countries, and selected universities like those from the top 100 universities in the world will be facilitated to operate in the country. What we can do to make NEP a success, what we can do for NEP 2020. The first step, as what is expected, is from the teachers. A success of NEP depends greatly on the clarity in planning for its implementation in stages. It may not be possible all at once, but then we have got to implement that one in stages. And the second is that since the focus even today is to cover the syllabus, we assume that the students do not know anything, and then teachers are there to provide the information and everything in that one. Even today online classes are, we are just trying to give the students with the lot of information, but the tomorrow is going to be different. In tomorrow's perspective, when the student comes to the class, they are likely to come with some experience and knowledge and acquired skills. They are not clean slates. Therefore, teachers are expected to act as facilitators. A teacher needs to create a conducive learning environment. It calls for a greater change in our attitude and in accommodating the students. So there is going to be a sea change in the conventional method of the role of a teacher in the years to come when NEP takes the full-blown shape. The last is that, the other point is that a pedagogical change can be brought by offering relevant training to the teachers to shift the gears from conventional teaching to the new format of teaching as a facilitator. Therefore, the expectations are by conducting activity-based real-time conditions, real-time problems of the industries and projects, which are linked to the industries, which offer more challenges to the students to think out of the box. They can use their acquired skills and then feel gratified about what they have learned. Now, the other greatest challenge is that when foreign universities set up campuses in the country, which is one of the major announcements made in NEP 2020, the transnational, cross-border, offshore, borderless higher education. This is the philosophy in which the foreign universities are going to really come up on shores. And NEP says that a legislative framework facilitating such entry of the foreign universities will be put in place, and such universities will be given special dispensation regarding regulatory, governance, and content norms on par with the autonomous institutions in India. So this is going to be a greater challenge for Indian universities and institutions. It is in the fixing of the curriculum and pedagogy to stay afloat with the foreign universities. This is the minimum we are expected to shoulder in the years to come when NEP is being introduced. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for the Professor Suresh for having accepted our invitation and then making his delivery on NEP 2020. Back to Professor Vittal.
Thank you, sir, for giving us the overall expectations of national education policy. And now we are moving forward with your words of wisdom. So I request Professor M.S. Bhatt to conduct the introduction of the speaker. Over to Professor M.S. Bhatt.
Thank you, Professor Vittal. Very good morning to you all. It is my pleasure to introduce the distinguished speaker, Professor A.K. Suresh, of today's webinar. Professor Suresh is an institute chair professor with the Department of Chemical Engineering at IIT Bombay. After his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from KREC Surathkal, he completed his master's from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and then a PhD from Monash University in Australia, all in the same discipline. He served a brief stint with the Hindustan Lever Research Center in Industrial R&D on his return to India, and then joined the faculty of IIT Mumbai in 1988. During his tenure at the institute, apart from being engaged in teaching and research, Professor Suresh also held important administrative responsibilities, including Chairman, Gate Western Region, Head of the Department of Chemical Engineering, and Dean Faculty Affairs, IIT Mumbai. Till recently, he was the Deputy Director in charge of all academic and infrastructural affairs at IIT Mumbai. And in his capacity, he was also a part of the 3-person think tank doing the strategic planning for the institute. In research, Professor Suresh Suresh's interests are on the broad theme of multi-phase reactive and transport systems. He and his group have made several pivotal contributions addressing some of the important contemporary problems in carbon capture, renewable energy, and renewable feedstocks for chemicals. Professor Suresh has guided 29 PhDs and is currently guiding 8. He has over 170 publications and conference presentations, including several keynotes and plenaries, and 2 patents. He serves or has served on the editorial boards of 2 international journals in this field. During his career, Professor Suresh has held visiting positions at various national and international institutions, including National Chemical Laboratory, India, Monash University, Australia, Australian Defence Force Academy, and Washington University in St. Louis, USA. Professor Suresh's work has been well recognized by the national and international scientific community. Among the recognitions, he has received the Visiting Fellowship of the Indian National Science Academy, the Hardilia Award for Excellence in Basic Research by the Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers, and the Education Leadership Award from the World Corporate Universities Congress. He is a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering and is currently a co-chair of the Mumbai chapter of the INEAE. The American Chemical Society recognized his engagement with the society's mission with the award of a 3-year membership in 2015. Professor Suresh currently serves on the board of NITK Surathkal. With this brief introduction, on behalf of the chairperson, director, BOG, and Senate members, faculty, staff, students, and alumni, I welcome Professor Suresh to deliver his talk. Over to Professor Vittal.
Thank you, Professor M.S. Bhatt. We are moving forward and requesting our distinguished speaker, Professor A.K. Suresh, take over the platform. Over to Professor Suresh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vittal. Let me try sharing my screen. Screen visible?
Yeah.
Visible.
Let me go to full screen. Yeah. So hope you can all see this and also hear me. Let me know if there are any glitches. Professor Balavi Reddy, Professor Maheshwar Rao, Professor Anant Narayana, Professor Vittal, Professor Bhatt, and all the distinguished personalities here present as audience. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the National Education Policy 2020, which has raised a lot of expectations and drawn a variety of comment from various sections of the society, educationists and non-educationists. And I have titled this talk today as NEP 2020, what it does for us and what we can do for it. And the title is it takes off from the famous quote by John F. Kennedy, which is in the footnote here: ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We have to adopt a similar philosophy towards the National Education Policy 2020 is my feeling, and I will elaborate on this in the next 45 minutes or so. I have a difficult task because I am following up on the first webinar by Professor Shiva Prakash, in which he comprehensively covered all the provisions of the National Education Policy. And even today, in the introductory remarks by Professor Anant Narayana and Professor Uma Maheshwar Rao, we saw a fair glimpse of what the policy attempts to do and what are its various provisions and what it means for us. So on the one hand, I have very little more to say to what has already been said. On the other hand, it makes my job a little easier because I can take perhaps every sentence of what Professor...
Excuse me,
yeah?
sir. You make your screen full screen, please.
I have made it full screen.
Okay. The side bars are visible, so that's the reason. No problem. Fine. Thank you.
It is full screen on my... Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, sir, probably you have shared your only one application, and after that, when you made the full screen, the previous one holds on. The new one will not come. So you might have to share the full screen.
Okay, okay. Let me unshare.
Yes, sir. So now when you share, sir, you can share the whole desktop screen so that when you make a full application, it will be visible to all of us.
Is it better now?
Yes, sir. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Okay, so let me proceed with the talk. So what I was saying was that in view of the considerably elaborate introduction that has already been given, what I can simply do is to take every sentence of what Professor Uma Maheshwar Rao said and then invite your comments and add my own comments to it, and that will make for the entire talk. But anyway, having put my head into this foolhardy enterprise, I have made a presentation, so I will go through with it. So let us start with some preliminaries. This is the third education policy, as most of you are aware, of independent India. The first one was in 1968. The second was in 1986, which was further amended in 1992. But note that the business of education did not stop for the educational policies to be approved. IITs and RECs were in fact created even before the first policy. So things have been going on, and every now and then, at the end of a period of time, the policy attempts to take a look at the situation on the ground and introduce correctives or introduce further incentives for aspects that it feels needs attention. NEP 2020 goes into a lot of detail. In fact, it is much more elaborate than the previous educational policies. The draft policy, which was released in 2019, 1 year ago, was all of 484 pages long. The final document has been whittled down to 66 pages. It covers all the aspects, and it incorporates all the feedback that has been received. Over 2 lakh items of feedback were received on the draft policy. If you go into the detail, the policy devotes a considerable amount of space, about 27 pages, almost half of the document, to school education. Higher education occupies 17 pages. The other areas, such as professional education and implementation details, occupy 12 pages towards the end. The context in which the policy has been formulated are the following. There is a widespread perception that things are not working on the ground as far as education is concerned. There are a few islands of excellence. There are the IITs, there are the IIMs, there are the the AIIMS, and there are the NITs and so on. These are the islands of excellence, but the general scene is rather disappointing. The overall picture is grim. And the perception is that education at every level has failed to prepare students for the next step. For example, if you look at the secondary school education, in the secondary school education is supposed to prepare students for the higher education, for the degree education, but engineering colleges, medical colleges, etc., do not trust the kind of education that has been imparted at the secondary school level. They insist on holding their own entrance exams, and to pass in these entrance exams and score well, students have to attend special coaching classes. It is not enough to have gone through the secondary school. So in some sense, the secondary school does not seem to have done enough to prepare students for the college education. And once again, if you look at the college education, it is supposed to prepare students for the vocation, for the profession. And once again, there are problems there. We produce a large number of graduates, but the industry and the society feel that these are unprepared for the tasks they are supposed to take up. And every industry, therefore, has to have its own elaborate training programs. And so generally, there is some skepticism that the education in the colleges, in the technical institute, is largely out of touch with reality. So these are some of the perceptions that in the background of which the present policy has been formulated. The second aspect is there has been an advent of disruptive technologies. The knowledge landscape has undergone rapid changes, very sweeping changes, and these have very telling implications on the employment scene. For example, as a result of the developments in the artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of space, it is expected that large sectors of jobs will disappear, while some other opportunities will be created elsewhere. But the people who lose their jobs do not necessarily have the skills to take up the new jobs which are coming up. The third point is that, as Professor Uma Maheshwar Rao mentioned in great detail, the low gross enrollment ratio in the country has been a concern. In fact, even the previous educational policies devote a lot of space to addressing this low gross enrollment ratio. And things have improved somewhat, but not to the extent that is required. Now, why this is a major concern, especially in today's context, is that everywhere you hear that India has a demographic advantage, the proportion of young people in the Indian nation is much larger than in other countries. You know, an extreme example is Japan, where the aging population contributes to a major percentage of the overall population. But this demographic advantage, if we have to capitalize on it, if we have to use it to our advantage, this population, this young population has to be trained in order to contribute meaningfully to the societal challenges, to the industry, to agriculture, and to various other sectors. If not, if they are not prepared, then this large population will hit the roads. There will be unemployment, there will be crime, there will be societal problems. So the demographic advantage can turn into a serious problem. So the gross enrollment ratio is really a matter of great concern given our demographics. The last point is that we have been talking about digitalization of education, distance learning, and open learning, and all of that. And the whole thing has got a sense of urgency because of the pandemic, because of which a lot of our institutes, all of our institutions, have had to embrace digital education, online education in a bit of a hurry with hardly any preparation. So although the policy was formulated before the pandemic does find a mention in the final document, and it is clear to the policymakers, to the authors of the policy, that the challenges posed by the pandemic have to be factored in formulating our policy. Now, I mentioned a list of problems with the Indian education system. Now, this does not appear to be a uniquely Indian problem. If you go back in history, right from the time of Plato, the prehistoric times, creative people have taken a very dim view of formal education. I have some quotations here. I mean, you can find a lot more on the net. Mark Twain has a typically tongue-in-cheek comment: "I have never let my schooling interfere with my education." So he feels that schooling interferes with education, not contributes to it. George Bernard Shaw says, "What we call education and culture is for the most part nothing but the substitution of reading for experience, of literature for life, of the obsolete fictitious for the contemporary real." I don't know why he said this, because if one takes it very seriously, except particularly the part on literature for life, nobody might be reading his books. But anyway, there it is. So this is another point of view, that experience and life and the contemporary real society or real world are much more worth having than education, which substitutes various other things for this. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "I pay the schoolmaster, but it is the schoolboys who educate my son." saying thereby that it is peer group learning that actually is important and not the formal education that is imparted in the school. The management guru Robert Buzzell said, the mark of a true MBA is that he is often wrong, but seldom in doubt. So there is this feeling that a formal education creates a false sense of superiority, gives a false confidence. And so even when one is wrong, one holds on to one's point of view. And this can have, deleterious effects rather than salutary effects on the way one functions in society. John Dewey, the doctoral mentor of our Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, has this to say: it is our American habit, if we find the foundations of our educational structure unsatisfactory, instead of attending to the foundations and strengthening the foundation, we add another story on the same weak foundation or a wing. So this we see in India also. So it looks like the problems that we are seeing in India are not peculiar to India. With all of this background, the National Education Policy 2020 is in front of us now, and the dominant undercurrent of the policy is encapsulated in the introduction in page 3. It says, there is a need for education to become experiential, holistic, integrated, inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented, learner-centered, discussion-based, flexible, and overall enjoyable. It should be an enjoyable experience. It should not be a chore for the students. So every word of this finds elaboration in the policy as we go into the policy. It has to be experiential, so there is a lot of stress on hands-on working, hands-on learning. It has to be holistic. There is a lot of stress on diversification and imparting various kinds of skills. In addition to the skill one tries to specialize in, it has to be integrated. This integration, once again, is talked about in the context of diversification, standalone colleges becoming universities, multidisciplinary universities, and so on. Inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented kind of teaching is emphasized. Learner-centered. So this is an important point that Professor Uma Maheshwar also emphasized. Presently, our education is largely teacher-centric. It is not learner-centric, and there is a stress on covering the syllabus and so on. And I might mention a small anecdote here. When Professor Kelkar was the director, he was the first director of IIT Kanpur, as many of you might know. A young assistant professor went up to him and said, Professor, I find there is very little time in the, for my course. I find myself unable to cover the syllabus. Professor Kelkar's response was, my dear young man, I did not hire you to cover the syllabus. The syllabus is already covered. It is lying unopened. It is lying closed. What I expect you to do is open it out and uncover a part of the syllabus. So this kind of learner centricity is what the the policy emphasizes. It has to be discussion based. It has to be interactive. It has to be flexible. Once again, choice should be with the student to choose what she wants to do. And over and above, it should be an enjoyable experience. People should want to go to education, and that is the only way the gross enrollment ratio can actually improve. The key areas visited by the policy, just to emphasize what has already been said, is one major thing is the preschool years, ages 3 to 6, which were not under the policy of under the ambit of formal education, have now been brought within the ambit of the policy. The 10+2 structure, which has been with us for quite a long time, has been replaced by 5+3+3+4. And in the first 5, there is a 3+2, the 3 years of preschool education. Taking gross enrollment ratio to 100% up to the secondary school stage, and alignment of the educational policy with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UNESCO, goal number 4, is another important area that the policy talks about. And what SDG 4 talks about is equitable access. I will have occasion to elaborate on equitable versus equality, equity versus equality. There is a stress on mother tongue and or home language or local language, as the case may be, as the medium of instruction, especially in the early years. And there is a stress on exposure to vocational crafts. The policy talks about broad basing the education across the board. It talks about breaking down silos and increasing commerce between and transaction between the various fields of learning. Skills education is to start early, and the multidisciplinary universities, which the policy spends quite considerable space on, will ultimately, it is envisioned, will replace the system of university affiliated colleges. A 4-year degree is proposed as the standard degree, and it allows possibility of exit after the first year or after the second year or after the third year, or of course one can do all 4 years of the degree. The changes which are proposed in teaching and learning philosophy are such as to inculcate creativity, creative thinking, a knowledge of and awareness of values and inculcation of values in the individual rather than rote learning. There is an attempt to bridge the divide between tradition and modernity. India has had a rich tradition in education. The policy talks about Vikramshila, Takshashila, Nalanda, and places like that. And of course, we have modernity. We are now today talking about the land grant university system of the United States, which has served the country so well. Which the world is seeing. In an attempt to bridge this divide, the policy talks about providing support for Indian languages, culture, heritage, trades, etc. And an important point by the policy is that it talks about light but tight regulation. It emphasizes the higher education institutions, HEIs, that they should take ownership of their own affairs. So it proposes to give a considerable amount of flexibility, increase the autonomy. We will talk a little bit more about this as we go along. And similarly, there is a consolidation of regulatory framework, which also Professor Uma Maheshwar Rao referred to. The Higher Education Council of India is the proposed body which under itself has one prominent vertical, which is regulation. And the research funding is also expected to be consolidated in what is called as a National Research Foundation. So while the emphasis in this talk is going to be on university education and in particular technical education, let me spend a little bit of time on school education, because the school system is what prepares or what should prepare the students for the university stage. So here is a summary of what the school education policy is. The age is on the top row here. So preschool education starts from age 3, and age 3 to 7, that is including the 3 years of preschool and grades 1 and 2, is called as the foundational stage, in which the mechanism of imparting education follows the early childhood care education model, ECCE. There has been a lot of research on ECCE in the world, and quite a bit has been written about how early childhood education is important and how it is to be done. Basically, all this research emphasizes that in this stage of the child into grades 1 and 2 as well. And then comes the preparatory stage, that is grades 3, 4, and 5, ages 8 to 10. This will be more formal, so there will be a gradual shift from the early childhood care education methodology to more formal, but once again, it will be an interactive learning kind of thing, not a total shift to formal learning, which will happen as you go to middle stage, that is the 3 years of 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Here, the education envisions, the policy envisions subject teaching to start. Students will start learning history, geography, civics, science, mathematics as separate subjects, and abstraction is brought to bear on the education that is imparted. And this leads up to secondary education, which is years 9 to 12. Once again, this is divided into years 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. This is expected to be multidisciplinary. There is some depth in addition to breadth is imparted in this stage. The pedagogy should be such as to promote critical thinking rather than rote learning. The student has a choice of subjects, so one is not constrained to study only science or only commerce or only arts, etc. One can mix and match according to one's preferences. And the medium of instruction, this is an important point that the policy goes into. It it emphasizes the research that shows that early learning is most effective if it is imparted in one's own mother tongue or the language that is spoken at home. Now, this has been debated in the press. The significance of mother tongue is losing somewhat its sheen because there are many families in which the husband has one mother tongue and the wife has another mother tongue, and the child quite easily picks up both mother tongues. So the mother tongue concept can sometimes be replaced by home language or the regional language. So this is what the policy emphasizes. It certainly says that up to grade 5, the medium of instruction should be in the mother tongue. So there are some issues with this because today there is a lot of mobility. People find jobs in areas which are outside their own state, and therefore a language might be being spoken at home, which is different from the regional language. And if the regional administration has to take care of all the possibilities of this kind, then there is a great need for teachers well-versed in all kinds of languages in every part of the country, and whether this is feasible, whether how long will it take to develop this kind of a cadre of teachers, all those questions are there. But the emphasis is on mother tongue, home language, and regional language, so that the learning is most effective. Even going forward up to year 8, it is said that the mother tongue is preferable, although one can switch to other mediums of instruction here. The 3-language formula kicks in about here and then goes into the secondary stage as well. Of course, the 3-language formula kicks in even earlier. So if you look at the languages taught, which is an important aspect in learning and communication. So up to year 2, the mother tongue and home language or regional language is the only language that is taught. And then comes the flexible 3-language policy. The 3-language policy has been in force for quite some time. It is made a little more flexible in this policy. And as the child goes into middle stage, one can substitute 2 of these 3 languages in years 7 and in grades 6 and 7. But basically, the intention is that the child should be able to demonstrate basic proficiency in 3 languages by the end of secondary school. Now, language teaching is further emphasized in terms of a fun project in the middle stage, where students undertake a comparative Indian language study project and execute it. And in the secondary stage, in order to broad-base the education, in order to broaden the mental landscape of the student, foreign languages can also be chosen as an option. As far as the examination is concerned, the policy makes a very refreshing comment that these exams should be seen as a way to improve schools rather than improve students. So if the results in a school are not very very good, then the school should view it as a comment on its own pedagogy, its own teachers, and the method in which the teaching is being done, rather than as a comment on the learners. So with that kind of a philosophy, examinations, the stakes associated with examination is kind of whittled down. The child writes 3 school examinations at the third standard stage, third grade stage, 5th grade stage, and the 8th grade stage. There are board exams like now at grades 10 and 12, but these are meant to be so designed that they test conceptual knowledge more than the rote learning, as is the case now. In addition to this school education model talks about adding coding. So we have seen the emphasis on 3 R's, which is kind of traditional: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Coding is added to that. Coding is introduced at about this stage, that is the 5th grade. The policy talks about school complexes. It recognizes that there's a certain critical size that is needed for education to be effective. And therefore, if the school cannot manage to be of that critical size, it can form part of a complex and therefore share resources from other schools and so on. The policy talks about special education zones for those areas where education is a dire need and is lagging behind. And it also talks about public-private twinning, because there is this perception that public schools are lagging behind private schools in the quality of education in general. So there is all of this. So let us now turn to higher education. I need to probably pick up a little speed here. If you look at the scene today, there are 789 universities, 37,204 colleges, 11,000 odd standalone institutions, and there is a bewildering variety among these places of learning. The variety in itself is not a bad thing, because there is so much variety in the kind of learning that has to happen. But there is variety also in regulation, also in standards and so on, and all this makes for a very difficult task to regulate and enforce standards on this large number of learning places. As far as the technical education is concerned, there are, as you know, 23 IITs and 31 NITs, and these are pretty much spread out today all over the country. Even the Northeast has been brought within the ambit of these institutions. These are institutions recognized as institutions of national importance. There are these, and of course, there is a large number of engineering colleges apart from these. Now, the present policy, in the face of all this kind of a scene, it envisions consolidation. Let's go of the system of affiliated colleges, because there is the university, and there is in a far-flung area, there is some college that is affiliated to the university. The university doesn't know what is going on over there, but the affiliated college does not have the freedom to do what it wants, because it is affiliated to a college, affiliated to a university, which has no sense or no sense of what has to be done in this place. So it gives this the go-by, and this system will yield place, it is expected, to multidisciplinary higher education institutions. The standalone colleges should shape up over a period of time to this multidisciplinary higher educational institutions, or they should die a death. They should ship out. 3 classes of higher educational institutions are recognized. Research intensive, where a lot of research is primary thing that goes on. There is also teaching intensive, where there is teaching, but there is also research. And then there are autonomous degree granting colleges, which are basically teaching institutions. This is, this seems to be based on the US model, where you have community colleges, which are autonomous degree giving institutions. And then there are the land grant universities, which are research intensive. And there are second rung universities where teaching and research go hand in hand. It is said in the policy that these HEIs will be autonomous, will be governed by their own boards, and it gives, it proposes to give flexibility, but with accountability. And there is a consolidation that is proposed of regulatory and funding authorities like National Research Foundation and the Higher Education Council of India. Going further, the policy emphasizes lifelong learning. Now, this is something that we see in the Western countries, especially the US, at any age, after you retire, for example, you can take up a field of study that is entirely alien to what you have studied in your younger years, and you can acquire a degree in that alien discipline. So this policy envisages this kind of a thing. Of course, adult education has been talked about in the previous policies as well, and there is a elaborate machinery, government machinery to cater to adult education. But this policy emphasizes open distance learning, which will allow anyone of any age to register for a degree, and with definite tracks. You can do medicine, you can do engineering, irrespective of your background and your age. The standard 4-year degree, which I talked about earlier, will allow finishing after 1 year with a certificate, or after 2 years with a diploma, or go on to the full degree in 3 or 4 years. If one opts for a 4-year degree, there is a research tilt in the 4th year, and the policy recognizes that MPhil degree, which has been in several universities, has not served its purpose, and proposes to discontinue it altogether. The academic bank of credit that was talked about in the introduction. This will facilitate credit transfer and multi-institutional learning, which enables students to choose for particular courses, particular institutions, and then transfer the credits from that institution to their home institute towards the degree. It is recognized that the teacher training programs, B.Ed and M.Ed, have not been very effective in the current scenario, and therefore a complete overhaul of the current teacher training programs is proposed. Internationalization is emphasized, but along with bilingual learning, even in the university stage. So there seems to be a bit of a dichotomy here, because if students have to be internationally mobile, globally mobile, then their English language training has to be strong. But anyway, that's what the policy says. Every higher education institution has to take ownership of its own fate and develop an institutional development plan. And the vocational education is meant to be revamped and made as respectable as professional education. So today, unfortunately, the situation is that if a student has done a diploma or an ITI training, she is looked upon as second rate in terms of her intellectual capabilities, and this is meant to be addressed by the policy. The policy does have some problem areas, as I see it. These are my personal opinions. This broad basing, if not directed, can result in unemployable individuals by spreading the learning too thin. So if students at a very young age may not have the required preparation or maturity to choose the subjects they want to learn with any kind of vision, and this can easily result in students sampling a number of subjects and not gaining sufficient competency in any of them, which might become a problem later on. So this has to be implemented very, very carefully. There are practical difficulties with early exit options. For example, if you envision, the 4-year BTech degree that we have, or a 4-year BSc degree, BS degree that is proposed, there are linkages throughout. The first year subjects feed into the second year subjects, and the first year is not meant to be seen as complete in itself. If one has to exit after first year, this kind of a completeness has to be brought in. To what extent this can be done, it involves practical difficulties, as I see it. The policy talks about reducing teaching load, if you look at the engineering colleges in the country, teachers are burdened with enormous teaching loads, and they hardly have any time to think or plan for their profession. And so if this has to be done, it requires faculty recruitment on a really massive scale across the country, and this can be a major challenge. On several fronts, the policy seems to make a bold departure, but then stop a little short and allows the existing mechanisms to also continue alongside the new mechanisms. For example, the policy talks about the National Testing Agency being responsible for all entrance exams, or even the fellowship eligibilities and so on. But then in the next breath, it says that the existing examinations which are used by higher education institutions will continue to exist if the institution so wants. Similarly, the National Research Foundation, it does not explicitly say that the existing mechanisms like DST, DBT, etc. will all be subsumed under the NRF. It is also as though the NRF will exist alongside of those other funding bodies, but will cater to those areas which are not within the purview of those other mechanisms. Now, again, as far as HECI is concerned, Professor Uma Maheshwar Rao mentioned that UGC, AICTE will go into HECI, but we all know what happened when this was tried a couple of years ago. It ran into a lot of problems, and the policy itself does not unequivocally say that the existing regulatory bodies will be amalgamated into this. So this again can be a problem area. While the policy aspires to eliminate commercialization of education, one has to be careful because the implementation might achieve the opposite instead of ensuring a lack of commercialization, because education has largely been seen as another way to make money historically, and so one has to be careful that this does not percolate in the new regime as well. While the policy recognizes institutional leadership as a key area of concern, in fact, it gives the board the powers to institute search for the head of the institution, unlike in the present regime. But it does not go beyond the head of the institution. It does not break any new ground in this area. If you look at institutions abroad, universities abroad, deanships and provost and these kinds of positions the university conducts an open search, and anybody from any university can apply, and it's a very detailed exercise that goes on there. The policy is rather silent on these kinds of leadership positions in our institutions. The implementation of tenure track philosophy is something that was also referred to. This is again a problematic area. It has been attempted in the 6th Pay Commission and the 7th Pay Commission, as you're all well aware. But the situation in India is a little different because the system has not matured enough. For example, if one does not get tenure in IIT Bombay, no other frontline IIT will want to hire this person, and she has a black mark associated with her capabilities. This is not so in the United States, where the higher education scene is so extensive that even if one does not get tenure in one institution, one can join another institution, do well. There are opportunities to conduct research, publish papers, get patents, etc., and then again move up in the career ladder or the institutional ladder. So this is again likely to be an area of difficulty in the implementation. Further areas where there could be problems, the timelines are rather aggressive, and this requires massive mobilization of resources of all kinds, plus evolving consensus among the stakeholders. I mentioned this because education is in the concurrent list. The states have to come on board, the private players have to come on board, and therefore all this requires time. And the policy envisages a very aggressive approach to implementation. The change in assessment philosophy and methodology has been talked about. It is badly needed, everybody agrees, but on the ground, the situation is very different. And in my opinion, it probably needs a national assessment policy in addition to national education policy. The policy does talk about professional degrees such as agriculture and veterinary science, law, medicine, engineering, etc. Now, to what extent can they become multidisciplinary? For example, if you expect a medical college to have a humanities department, of a thriving humanities department in which the humanities faculty do not regard themselves as second-class citizens in the faculty. So that is going to be a bit of a tall ask. Now, the policy talks about liberalization of education. Liberal arts as a philosophy of education, as it is understood in the world today, it encompasses education in the sciences, in the arts, and the humanities. So this is a philosophy of education that is supposed to broaden the mind, and it needs to be distinguished from mere teaching of the arts. It is not enough if you teach someone painting or carpentry or pottery or something like this. All of these are worthwhile arts in their own right. But liberal arts education as a philosophy is something over and above the mere teaching of the arts. The MERUs, which were talked about earlier, will they be asked to become multidisciplinary as well? The policy seems to talk about set apart MERUs as a separate category of institutions. And of course, some of our institutions like the IITs have become multidisciplinary to an extent. For example, IIT Kharagpur has a medical degree now. Most IITs have management education as part of it. Design education is part of several IITs, etc., etc. But of course, medical education is not very common in these institutions. Law education is not very common. So this is a question that needs to be asked. The list of desirable disciplines that the policy talks about at several places is too extensive. And in order to teach all of these competently, where would we find faculty in the numbers that is needed? Because every institution will have all these disciplines. That is the vision. Finally, there is the elephant in the room, funding. The policy does envisage an increase in budgetary allocation from 3% to 6%. Currently, apparently, the allocation is something of the order of 4.4% or so. Previous policies have also talked about a 6% investment in 6% of the GDP investment in education, but it has not happened because there are always other priorities for the government and so on. So, this needs to be seen as a commitment from the government. There are some areas that the policy does not visit. As far as the the gross enrollment ratio is concerned, it would have been good for the policy to create dedicated support structures and schemes for first generation learners. There is a pawnwala or there is a carpenter who has not learned, who is probably not even literate, and his son has this ambition to go to school, and it is there is a lot of difficulties for the first generation learners, and separate mechanisms, in my opinion, are needed in order to cater for the first generation learners. This would have gone a long way, but the policy does not talk about it, unfortunately. There is a repeated emphasis on equity as opposed to equality. Now, there is a distinction to be made between these two words. Equity talks about giving support where it is needed so that different sections can be brought up to the same stage. Whereas equality talks about giving the same opportunity to everyone. We are probably not ready for equality. Equity is emphasized in the policy as a result. Now, as a result of, in order to emphasize equity, in order to implement equity, will the National Research Foundation have a track for bringing aspirational higher educational institutions up to speed in research? So a dedicated track that addresses, that bars the already proficient institutions like IITs, etc., to compete along with the aspirational HEIs. Will it have this kind of a track is not very clear. Perhaps a greater emphasis was needed on vocational education, such as offered by ITIs, polytechnics, etc., which supply the manpower not only to industry, but it provides very important and very badly needed technical support manpower to the higher educational institutions such as NITs and IITs. If this tech support is good, then the faculty can function much more efficiently. The changes in the knowledge landscape and emergence of disruptive technologies and their implications for skills needed in the future, I talked about it early on. The policy does recognize this, but perhaps a dedicated institution is needed to study the linkages between science, technology, and society and inform policy on a continuous basis, because these are all areas in which the scenario is changing very rapidly, and therefore a dedicated institution was probably needed. History and philosophy of engineering is an important area which also figures in this science, technology, society linkages, because when you talk about engineering interventions and technological interventions, there is a definite societal context, there is a definite local or a regional context to these interventions. an engineering intervention that works, for example, in Germany, maybe will not be very effective in India, because it has to factor in the local conditions, the local history of technology, local culture of technology development, etc. And elsewhere in the world, there are very well-developed schools in history and philosophy of engineering that does not find a prominent mention in the policy. Okay, now we come back. I'm already at 12:15. Professor Vittal, can I take 5 or 7 minutes more?
Yes, sir. We are getting up to 1 o'clock. So definitely the interactive session will be of short. You can complete, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you for that. So now we come back to ask what you can do for NEP. NEP, of course, has a lot of good intentions and a lot of policies it makes provision for. It has some shortcomings in my opinion, and there are other people have also written about certain areas that are not touched by the policy. But aside from all that, now we have a document which enables several things, enables us to do several things. How can we respond? How can we make it succeed in spite of whatever shortcomings it may have? That is what I will spend the next few minutes on. There is the opportunity provided by the policy for continuous improvement for faculty, teaching faculty. This is an opportunity that has to be grabbed with both hands by our institutions. And the ways in which this can be done is, for example, establish linkages with MERUs. The engineering colleges can establish linkages with MERUs. Of course, the MERUs have to also respond favorably to this. And in this, the credit transfer features, the academic credit bank that the policy talks about can be exploited for student exchanges, for conducting joint research projects as part of student education or otherwise. And this will gradually lead to other forms of collaborations, joint proposals for funding, grants, and so on. So this is something that needs to be explored so that the whole scene comes up. And at that stage, it will be easy to implement a tenure track kind of a system, because one has a lot of opportunities to migrate if one finds finds oneself without tenure in one institution. There are a number of opportunities which are all equally good. Our institutions should quickly set up committees to develop a comprehensive institutional development plan, which the policy talks about, and equally important, obtain a buy-in from all the stakeholders, such as students, faculty and staff, and alumni. I will briefly mention IIT Bombay's own experience here. We set up a committee for developing a strategic plan arising out of some comments that came from a review of the institution. And this committee took about a year to come up with a document, a strategy document. This was then discussed extensively and separately with the student community, with the faculty, with alumni, and there was also, I believe, a town hall in which the civic society was asked to participate and provide feedback. And as a result of all that, this has been now fine-tuned, and aspects of this IDP are now being implemented. So this is we have benefited greatly from the formulation of this IDP. There is a need to continuously evaluate the market so that we can respond quickly, the institutions can respond quickly to the need for new courses. New challenges are coming up as AI and ML take hold, and as biology makes enormous advances. And these new courses, well, it's not easy in our systems to start a new program. For example, if you want to start a new program in blockchain, for example, you have to find faculty, and you have to have mechanisms for evaluating their applications, all of that. So perhaps these can start in the outreach mode first, where you can involve external people, alumni, and external stakeholders. And then these can, over time, this can be assimilated into formal programs. For example, cinematography. India has a large, movie-making activity in Bollywood. So cinematography, there are not enough schools which teach, which offer programs in cinematography, animation, AR, VR, augmented and virtual reality, and related areas. So these are some areas in which the institute has to continually be in touch with the situation outside and respond quickly. Institutions should seriously take up branding. For example, a place like NITK has a lot going for it, and this has to be made known to the external world. So we establish a brand, we communicate this brand to the external world, and we exploit this to attract foreign students, perhaps starting with the ASEAN and other regional countries, the Southeast Asian and the Asian neighbors, like Ceylon, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. And then in order to facilitate this, we can set up an external students office. The policy talks about an international students office. But if you look at India, India is itself like Europe. Every state is like a country with its own culture, with its own language, and so on. And therefore, an external students office is probably worthwhile, and it can ease the induction of people from students from other regions of the country as well. Going further, as far as increasing the hands-on component is concerned, which the policy envisions, institutions should take a proactive role in establishing tinkering labs in student spaces, such as hostels or areas close to hostels, which students can access 24/7, and these are managed by students. We have one such space in IIT Bombay, not exactly in the hostel space, but in the academic area itself, but it is working well. It has 24/7 access, managed entirely by students. And there are, the institutions can explore not-for-credit projects, summer workshops with the help of local artisans. I recall that in Monash University, when I did my PhD, the summer used to be very vibrant. There used to be courses and workshops in pottery, photography, all kinds of things, bamboo weaving, all kinds of things with the help of local artisans. We can also think of that. The institutions should establish a program in educational technology, given the emphasis that is placed on pedagogy in the policy. In time, this can assimilate other allied areas like distance learning and continuing education and develop into a school of educational technology. The institutions can evolve a framework for meaningful assessment methods and a consistency in favor of it. So right now, there is a bewildering variety of assessment methods, but everywhere the emphasis is mostly on assessing how much of the syllabus covered has the student assimilated. So COVID-19 provides a great opportunity to rethink our assessment strategies, because as we go online, the main problem is assessment. So we should innovate in this area and involve experts in educational technology in this aspect as well. Any diversity will only help the institutions. Pay particular attention to addressing the gender balance. There is a very informative and educative document that was prepared by Dr. Professor Rohini Godbole of the Indian Institute of Science for INSA, which identifies several reasons why the gender ratio is so poor in the faculty. If you look at the PhD scenario, the gender ratio is quite good, but when it comes to taking teaching as a vocation, the ratio suddenly seems to drop. So the document goes into various reasons why this happens, and specific interventions also are probably needed at the faculty level in order to convince women candidates that these are institutions where they can thrive and they can contribute as well as their male counterparts. And it is time that periodical curriculum reviews are undertaken, and in particular, attention should be paid to strengthening the humanities content, on which the NEP is quite emphatic. And one should also look at whether, look at the option of exploring a liberal arts approach altogether. We in IIT Bombay have been looking at this for about a year now, and in time we might have a degree that is a hybrid of the sciences, humanities, and engineering. Going further, evaluate the master's programs carefully. This is needed because our master's programs are such that the industry doesn't seem to place any premium on the master's qualification. So we should ask ourselves, what can we include in the master's program so that they add value to the student, so that the market actually sees value in giving higher salaries to the master's qualified students as compared to the BTechs or BEs. The library, in particular, in the information age, has to really reinvent itself. In particular, it can provide collaborative spaces and facilitate peer-to-peer learning. You know, I recall your attention to one of the quotes that Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote, where he emphasized peer-to-peer learning. This is very true. Peer groups need to be exploited for other purposes, such as remedial learning. So you can identify student communities and mentors in all of these areas. Remedial learning, people who are falling behind can be mentored by their own peers. That is much. And there are various mental difficulties that students get into because for the first time they're coming out of the the parental umbrella. And in addressing counseling needs also, student mentors can help. Alumni should be treated as a resource that can bring an awareness of latest developments, create networks to promote student employment opportunities, entrepreneur mentoring, and of course, funding. And keep eyes open to local developmental needs, local industry, local resources. It is perhaps having a periodical kind of town hall to make known to the local community what our institutions are all about, what is going on here, how we can contribute to them, and how they can contribute to activities and so on. So that is basically what I have. To sum up, the policy is certainly well-intentioned, but implementation is the policy should be seen as an enabler. It should be seen as an opportunity for institutions and step up to recognize what roadblocks are there and implement correctives. And taken together with the IIT Act, the NITSER Act, and so on, and the empowering clauses in the policy can be, it has the potential to be a game changer. I really believe this, if the institutions use it effectively and the governments implement it with the vision that is required. Thank you very much. Sorry, I have extended the time, but hopefully there will be some time for discussion.
Thank you, sir. So we now go forward with the next objective is the interactive session, in which our webinar participants will interact with you and try to see what doubts they have, so that we will have a wonderful interactive session. Over to the participants.
Okay, Shiva Prakash, can I come in?
Yeah, please.
Professor SURESH, I think let us all congratulate him for a very exhaustive. This is very important, and as Janaf, your title itself, I liked it. Always we think that what institute will do for us. I think we should always think, what is that I can give it to institute? What is that I can give it to the India? I think you have justified your title. I think you said about 45 minutes you'll be speaking. I think I know as a teacher, it is almost overestimate or underestimate many times. I think a very, very wonderful thing. I thoroughly enjoyed all the aspects from primary to secondary to the graduation, post-graduation, what are the issues in the NEP, and what is that we can do. I think some of your thoughts are very, very important. I'm sure that NITK would get benefited by this, and many people who are listening to you today in YouTube, I think it's a high opener. Thank you. I think I came only just to compliment you, and I think you have done a great job today. Thank you. Professor SURESH, thank you once again.
Thank you for the kind words. I was afraid you might ask a very difficult question.
There is nothing difficult for you.
So participants can raise hand, or you can come in.
Professor Vikal?
Yes, please. Yeah. Lakshman.
Yes.
Over to Lakshman.
Professor SURESH, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. It was really an eye-opener, as Professor Shiva Prakash said. It was really very interesting, and you brought out some nuances which one would not get easily by reading the document. I just had one or two comments to make, not really a question. When it comes to the implementation part, I think that is where obviously they are going to face massive issues. Because, at the scale at which this has to happen, it is not just having a document, but really implementing it in a real sense. And we all know how difficult it is to implement even a simple plan at the level of an institution, especially one which is governed by rules and regulations. So do you think we should also be thinking about having something like an Indian academic administrative service, a special kind of cadre, where we bring in people with that kind of attitude, where they know what difficulties exist in academic institutions, and not to look at it like a government department. So that is one comment which I have to make. The other was one with regard to the equity and equality, which you very nicely pointed out the difference. But I think the inequity still exists, especially when it comes to research funding in the centrally funded institutions. And although we may not accept it, but we may say what is in a name. But I think when it comes to technical education in India, everything is in the name. Whether you're called an IIT, or whether you're called an NIT, or whether you're called an IIM, or you're called an ISER, it makes a lot of difference in the way the perception is created about these institutions. So, and I don't think any other country in the world has this kind of a hierarchy of institutions with the same common name, with only the name of the place being changed. So do you think at some point of time in the future, we may have to get rid of these so-called clubs? So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for those quite insightful remarks. As far as the academic administration is concerned, I don't know whether there are rumblings about even having the Indian administrative service, although it has served the country well. But of course, there are different points of view on the desirability of such a dedicated administrative service, and the kind of hierarchy about the society at home. And personally,
your voice is breaking, Professor Suresh.
Hello, Professor Suresh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
No, he's still replying, Amba.
Okay, sorry.
1 minute. Yeah, I just finished. So, but certainly, you may be aware that there is this LEAP program that the MHRD has started. So
Correct.
those are steps in the right direction in training faculty for leadership positions. So I have the presentation that leadership is something on which, apart from the head of the institution, the policy doesn't say much. But these kinds of interventions are certainly desirable. That's number one. And your second question about equal playing ground and equity in funding, certainly something that we should attempt, at least in the short term, for the next 10 to 15 years, because there is a lot of variety in our institutions, and the capabilities also vary quite a bit. And therefore, that is why I proposed in the NRL that there should be a track which is available only to the, for want of a better word, second-rank institutions.
The underprivileged.
The Merus and so on should not be competing there, and there must be dedicated funding where, and you can restrict. You can only write 1 or 2 proposals in that framework, and then you have to graduate to the next, the higher framework, etc. So this kind of will provide opportunities for the institutions which are starting out on the research path to come up to speed, and then they can compete with the rest of the institutions as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Suresh.
Hello.
Over to Amba Shetty, madam.
Yes. Professor Suresh, the title of your presentation is very nice. What NEP does for us and what we can do for it. Other day, I was attending your webinar on, alumni, NIT alumni have conducted on webinar. When the moderator asked one question, what is the difference of being a faculty and an administrator? You said one thing I like the most. You said, everyone should own the institution. Every faculty member should think that they are the HODs of the department. Everyone, maybe deans and all, they should think they are the director of the institute. When we think in that sense only, whatever policy that we implement, it will all take a good shape.
Yeah. I completely agree with that kind of a philosophy. And, I believe that at least in our institutions, we are trying to implement that. The process of policy making is largely consultative. I mean, jokingly, it is sometimes said that in IIT Bombay, there are 670 directors. Every faculty thinks of himself or herself as as director. So I mean, that is a bit facetious, I guess, but I agree that the process has to be bottoms up. It has to be consultative, and it has to involve the faculty at large, the students at large, the staff at large, and then only the institution will progress, particularly with our kind of an environment where you don't impose anything from above and expect it to work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Suresh, can I? Professor Jayakumar, NIT Warangal.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks for the lovely talk. I heard Professor Shivprakash also last time. And the past 10 days, I've been attending so many of these webinars on NEP. And probably I would consider both Shivprakash and yours as probably two of the best lectures that we had. We had one day first day in NIT Warangal, which I had shared with NIT faculty as well. The ideas that you have said, in fact, I really liked what we can do for NEP, because that is what is left, uncovered in the NEP. They're given a very small document, just 63 pages. I think the present NEP changes our paradigm shift from stagnant education system to a more vibrant education system with multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary program as well, with a lot of exit ideas. In fact, we had proposed in one of the seminars recently that we give a certificate in engineering science at the end of first year by remodeling the syllabus. At the end of second year, a diploma, a third year post diploma, and at the end of fourth year, a BTech honors or BTech with a research tilt, that which I've highly covered. Thanks for the wonderful talk, very lucid, and I really enjoyed the time that I spent this morning. I really feel the time is worthwhile. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate your kind words.
So, Professor Vittal?
Yes, sir.
Do you have time? I just have a few questions
Yes,
to Professor Suresh.
Yes, sir.
Professor Suresh, may I have a few questions to you?
Please go ahead. Hopefully they're not too difficult.
Yeah, the first and foremost thing is about the likely challenges which we are going to face about the introduction of the top foreign universities, which are falling within the top 100. Well, that's what is being envisaged in the NEP at 2020. And how do you really place the Indian institutions and the universities when they are pitched against this top ranked foreign universities? Then they open the campuses in India. This is number one question, sir. And shall I ask the questions all at once, and then so that you can just maybe answer them at the way in which you want to. And the second question, sir, is that about this track tenure and then tenure track position, and then the multiple entries and then exits. They go hand in glove as far as the foreign universities are concerned, because teachers are also the learners, and then only in that particular equation that the multiple entry and exit of the students, where the teacher is also walking along with the students. And then if we really remove the track tenure positions from our system, and then trying to introduce a multiple entry and exit, is it going to really create a mess of everything? This is number two, sir. These are the two questions which I have for you.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Rao. Good questions. As far as the first point, the top 100 institutions coming in and setting up campuses within the country is concerned,
Yes,
my
sir.
own personal view is that the policy should have been a little more liberal in not restricting this to the top 100 institutions, because the top 100 institutions, what is in it for them to come and set up campuses here? The most important driver here would be to get quality students into their programs.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
the top 100 institutions already have they have less problems in attracting the best students into their campuses, and therefore they may not see a great advantage in setting up campuses here. That's number one. That is a personal opinion. The other aspect is that, I mean, how does it impact our institutions? That is the other question that you pose.
Yeah.
And of course, we have to kind of pull up our socks and then be competitive with the best in the world, which is something that we are attempting even now, because in the arena of global rankings, QS, you are actually competing with the best in the world anyway. So several mechanisms are being put in place here. But one thing that I personally feel is that institutions should not chase ranking. Rankings should chase institutes. So if you have a mindset that I should improve this parameter, then my ranking will improve. I should improve that parameter, my ranking will improve. Then the whole thing becomes a game, and it will not serve a long-term purpose. On the other hand, if your objective is excellence, and then along the way the rankings will come to you. So have a long-term plan. So this is if that kind of an approach will pay dividends, whether there are global institutions on Indian soil or not. So this is as far as the first question is concerned. The second point was about multiple exit entry and entry. I don't know if I got your question correctly, but you're talking about two things here. One is the tenure track appointment system.
Yeah.
And the multiple entry and exit for students. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Precisely.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as tenure track philosophy is concerned, the higher education scene in India is not really mature to absorb that at this present stage, is what I feel, because as I said, one joins an institution like NITK or IIT Bombay, and grows roots there. He puts the child to school there, and his wife finds an employment there, and all of that. And 3 years later, you tell him or her, thank you, you go find yourself another institution. We are not the place for you. Now, it's rather difficult for an individual in that kind of a position to come to terms with this kind of thing. That's number one. Mobility is not still within India is not that easy at those stages. The second thing is, then he goes to, let us say, IIT Kharagpur, and first question IIT Kharagpur will ask him is, what happened to you at IIT Bombay? Why did you not get tenure? And no matter what he gives as the answer, the IIT Kharagpur will not be convinced, and they will probably not even shortlist such a candidate for the final interview. So, all these kinds of mindsets are there. In the US, what happens is that you always find an appointment in maybe a slightly lesser institution, but that lesser institution also provides opportunities for doing research, for publishing, and for coming to speed. And one can always aspire to move back to a higher ranked institution in the course of time. So that type of situation has to happen in India. And hopefully with NEP 2020 and all these autonomy and flexibility and self-governed HEIs and so on, that scene will eventuate in India in about 10 to 15 years. And at that point, we can seriously think of tenure track appointments and so on. This is my personal view.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
And just to respond to your the other part about multiple entries.
Multiple
and
entry. Yeah.
Yeah. So there again, there's a bit of a problem. If a student wants to exit at the end of 1 year, one has to make sure, the institution has to make sure that that 1 year education is complete in itself. Normally, when you design a 3-year degree, the 3 years is all integrated, okay, or 3 or 4 years is all integrated. So you have to make the syllabus and curriculum in such a way that within the first year itself, one gets a well-rounded and complete in itself kind of a package, which in my view can be quite a challenge. So it has to be addressed. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Professor Vittal, can I ask?
Yeah, please proceed.
Yeah. Good morning, Professor Suresh. I am Professor Vijay Desai from Mechanical Department.
Good morning.
Yeah. So one good thing that I have realized in this new education policy is that there is a clear-cut indication that there should be, equal importance to the teaching learning component alongside the research. Somehow, in last 2 decades or so, my observation is that the emphasis on research has, predominated a little too much as compared to the teaching learning process, which has taken a back step, especially at undergraduate level. This is my observation, and also similar feelings I have heard from many of the faculties. So this should encourage most of the teachers that teaching learning, there is no replacement for that. And good teachers who deliver good teaching learning material and make students learn will have some importance of their contribution. So I want your opinion on that.
That keeps recurring time to time, and my view on this is that our assessment philosophy has to change. The way in which we assess faculty, whether for promotion or whether for awards or whether for whatever else, we tend to take the easy way out because research is easy to evaluate. You can count the publications, you can look at impact factors of the journals when she has published. You can also look at citations, you can look at H indices and things like that. So it's an easy task to do, anybody can do it. One doesn't need an expertise in the area to evaluate these kinds of parameters. On the other hand, teaching, there is only student evaluation, and that is also not very well done in many cases. And and there are various reservations that teachers have, that the students rate well those instructors who give them good grades, and all kinds of misgivings are there. So faculty themselves are not really in favor of these kinds of evaluations being used strongly for us. So one has to take a comprehensive kind of a view on the total personality of the faculty, which consists of 3 parts: teaching, research, and service. But having said that, I am of the view that it should not be an either or. In our system, in the Western system, for example, in US, you find research faculty, you find purely teaching faculty. I think we are not yet ready for that kind of a situation. Once our system is not yet mature to allow 2 different types of coexist, that will kind of hierarchy. So one is expected to do all 3 of these: teaching, research, and service to the institution and the profession. But one can excel in one and not excel in the other. That should be okay, except that one should not be 0 in any of these departments. So it is possible to evaluate faculty on this kind of a basis. It is more work. It's not as easy as counting publications or citation indices and so on. But that is what will address this kind of situation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Professor Vittal, can I?
Yeah, please proceed.
Yeah. First of all, Professor A.K. Suresh, I would like to congratulate for providing a wonderful webinar. I would like to join my hands with others for congratulating you. I had 2 questions, but anyway, one question you are already answered. That is with respect to multiple entry, multiple exit option. That is how it can be realized in the Indian situation. You said it's really a challenge. My another question is this regarding this academic credit banks. or academic bank of credits. It is very nice to hear that having a bank of credits and the students can accommodate the credits and they can make use of it anywhere they can go. But how difficult it is going to be realized in the Indian situation? Can you throw some lights on that?
Actually, yeah, I'm fortunately in a good position to answer that question because we have implemented something like this at NIT Bombay. In our civil engineering department, NIT Surat, some 2-3 years ago, came up with a proposal and which was discussed in IIT Bombay, and with some modifications it was made effective, in which the final year students selected by IIT Bombay, final year students of NIT Surat, will go through a selection process, and then they will come to IIT Bombay and do the final year courses here. So there is a course mapping that is done, there is credit transfer that is allowed and all that. And then they go back and they get their degree from NIT Surat. Now, these students have the additional advantage that they have seen the IIT system and they are conversant with it, so that if they want to pursue a higher degree, maybe a master's or a PhD, they have an advantage, and the institution makes an allowance. If selected, even without GATE, these students can enter into the master's or PhD program. So this has worked well. The civil engineering department is extremely happy with it. And therefore, now we are going to extend this with NIT Surat, with the other departments as well. And in fact, I had some email to Professor Uma Maheshwar Rao. We should look at these kinds of possibilities because we already have a MOU between NITK and IIT. So this seems like it is something that is possible to do. And I might also add that we have these kinds of semester exchange programs with several universities abroad as well. People come from there, spend a semester here, take those credits back to their home university, and then finish up their degrees. So all these are existing mechanisms, and they are working well. And we see a lot of advantages in propagating these kinds of models.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hello,
this,
Professor Vittal, can I ask a question?
Conclude? We are
Hello,
almost.
Professor Vittal?
May I know who is this?
I am Kulkarni, NIT, ENC department.
Last question, please. Please proceed.
Sir, Professor Suresh, good morning, sir. It was a wonderful talk, a wonderful lecture I have ever attended so far. You talked about education, primary education also, which is part of NEP. We know that our primary education is ridden with excessive number of issues. A vast number of schools, have no structures, no fundamental facilities like drinking water, urinals, power, furniture, study material, so on and so forth. How does this NEP address this issue? You may have policy, but to implement in the real sense of the term, in fact, many don't have teachers. How can this NEP help to improve our basic education, sir? Primary education. First 3 years and the next 3 years.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and the NEP does go into the need to prop up the infrastructure in every school, and it also talks about these school complexes where certain facilities can be shared and all that. But of course, if you look at the Indian scene, there are a large number of schools all over the place where there are not even basic facilities like you mentioned toilets. I will also add blackboards and benches in these kinds of schools. They are lacking. So these kinds of minimal infrastructure is also lacking. It is not uncommon to find several classes being combined and being taught by one teacher in a common room because there is shortage of teachers. Now, the policy does recognize these kinds of shortcomings and talk about the fact that basic infrastructure will be provided to every school. And of course, it talks about school complexes and all that. But the fear I have is that, it is not an easy task. It's the kind of financial outlay that it's going to take is going to be humongous. And even if the 6% outlay is, the government comes forth and allocates 6% of the GDP towards education, I am afraid this entire 6% can be earmarked towards primary education alone, and even then it may or may not be sufficient. But if the extra outlay is entirely used up in improving school education, it will be a worthwhile cost, is what I feel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this. And 6% is not good enough. That's what I was also feeling. It should be much higher than that. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So with
We
this,
should achieve 6%.
to the end of interactive session. So shall we move forward?
Yeah, please.
So I would request Professor KVM Rao, Director NITK Surathkal, to deliver presidential address. Because of some preoccupation, Professor Balvi Reddy has been busy now and he requested you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Dual role for director. POG chairs.
Yeah. So it's a 2-in-1. I take it as a privilege to be giving the presidential address. And then the intention of having the webinar series is to precisely what we have been really discussing for almost half an hour about the interactive session. Is one aspect of this webinar is that the speaker will deliver his address, and then there is interactive session. And today's interactive session and then the first interactive session has really given us a way forward to prepare for ourselves, and then it's a preparedness for NITK and then any other institution which have really heard to today's lecture, that what do we really look forward to in NEP 2020, and what are the hurdles, bottlenecks which we have got to really expect on the way, and then how to really overcome them. That is the basic idea of conducting this series of webinars. And then exclusively one day, one speaker, and then one session. Our intention is to really give enough time to the audience as well to have their interactive sessions with the speaker. And then I take this opportunity on behalf of all the faculty members, students, staff, and everyone, and the other guests who have really come. I thank everyone to give us this opportunity. And then I take this opportunity to thank Professor Suresh for having accepted our invitation and then spent your time with us. And then further, I would like to thank Professor Shivkumar for having really spent his time today, and then Professor Jayakumar also. And then what I wish is that this is not the end of what we really are going towards, this NEP implementation. And whatever the topic that really has to be addressed, maybe from the audience, we can really come out with their titles, which are the titles on which we have got to really have a detailed discussion. Maybe that's where from the floor, if we really try to take the topic for the next few sessions, maybe that is going to really be of greater help for the implementation of NEP 2020. And then as I stated that NEP 2020, it is a long drawn policy, because it is almost after 30 years that we are going to have a detailed education policy. And then this is also a long run plan, maybe another 20-30 years it is the way forward to. And then maybe the vision of NEP 2020 by 2035, even if we are going to increase the enrollment, gross enrollment to 50%, I think we have really achieved a great point. So I thank once again Professor Suresh for having spent your time. Thank you very much. Professor Vittal.
Thank you, sir. So we are now heading to the last session, that is vote of thanks. So it gives me pleasure. First of all, I wish to thank our chief guest, Professor A.K. Suresh, for unveiling the philosophy of this national education policy, because the academician is the one who creates abstraction in the form of philosophy, and he is the one who has to decode it. So in that respect, today's presentation was really giving us clear insight how to frame up our curriculum is the next step which requires to be handled. So with that, I wish to thank Professor A.K. Suresh, and I wish to thank our chairperson, Professor Balvi Reddy, and our director and deputy director, Dean Faculty Welfare, and all other faculty, alumni, students, so who are with us for in this journey. And we have today the second seminar. Tomorrow we continue with this third webinar. So with that, we will be able to frame up our curriculum to meet the national education policy. With that, I thank everyone for kind cooperation. So with this, we conclude our webinar session. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, thank you, Professor Suresh. Take care. My best wishes, Professor Rao.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all.
Yeah, Professor Vittal and every one of you are my colleagues at NETK. Thank you very much. Take care, and we all have e-lunch. E-lunch for a virtual platform, and real lunch we will have at our own places. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Suresh.
Best wishes to everyone in Surathkal.